I don't think Natalia is not coming today, but we do have other folks. Great. All right. So we're on a working session today. I'll go ahead and get started and just do the opening remarks. And then I have a couple red line versions and we can get to the sorry. Okay. All right then. Good morning, everyone. I am City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations, Thursday, March 25th, 2021, and we're here today for a virtual working session on Docket 0216, an ordinance to establish guidelines for permitting retail residential kitchens, referred to the committee on January 13th, 2021. And also, this is a combined working session on Docket 0415, an order regarding a text amendment for the Boston Zoning Code to add retail residential kitchens as an accessory home occupation, referred to the committee on March 10th. The sponsor of both dockets is Councilor Mejia. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order, we're modifying our meeting to allow for us to meet virtually. This helps us to balance the current public health crisis with the ability to do our jobs. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all counselors. So again, these were there's one an ordinance and one is a text amendment for the Boston zoning, or for the zoning code. The ordinance will amend the zoning, the City of Boston code by allowing for retail residential kitchen permits to prepare cottage foods. Operators of retail residential kitchens would be required to comply with the state sanitary code and would be subject to annual inspections by the health division of the city's ISD department. Applicants for these permits would be required to obtain all necessary permits and regulatory approvals, including approvals from the Zoning Board of Appeal. This is under the ordinance. The proposed text amendment will allow residential kitchens as an accessory use as of right, which might help us to forego the ZBA. So participating today, I have from my colleagues, Councilor Liz Braden, Councilor, of course, the lead sponsor, Councilor Mejia, and myself. And then in terms of the administration, we have Commissioner Dion Irish, Chief of Staff of ISD, Chris English, ISD Health Inspector Dan Prendergast. We have Deputy Director, Regulatory Planning and Zoning of the BPDA, Brian Glasscock. We have also Fire Marshal Brian P. Tully. And we've been joined by Councilor Bach as well. And I'm making sure I got everyone from the administration. Commissioner Jack Dempsey, my apologies, from Boston Fire Department. And I think I have everyone from the administration and from the city council. We've also been joined by Andre Entazari, who is an advocate for residential kitchens. And I don't know, is Manisha here today? Manisha may be joining us. Councilor Mejia, is Manisha or Irene joining us today? Well, I'll just say their names and they may join us later on. You are on mute. We have been joined by and may be joined by Manisha Sethi, from technology engineer from Indalish, and Irene Nakabonge Lugude, founder of Mani Juices. So I'm going to go ahead and allow for some very brief kind of, I guess, setting or kind of remarks from the lead sponsor of both matters. And then we're going to get to the working session and have the administration kind of go through language suggestions and so on and so forth. So Councilor Mejia?
Yes. Hi, sorry. Can you hear me now? I'm having internet issues, so sorry to bust your eardrums there. So thank you again to the chair for moving all of this along, really greatly do appreciate your support in this. I just wanted to provide some brief remarks. This working session, we have added a new docket for this discussion. In addition to our ordinance regarding permits for retail kitchens, we have added the text amendment. As you already heard, Councilor Edwards gave us the rundown. The goal is to ensure that this process is as easy as possible for entrepreneurs to get ready their businesses started. Without the zoning amendment, these entrepreneurs will have to seek a zoning variance, get written permission from their landlord, and deal with a lot of red tape. We hope to see the ordinance and the zoning amendments pass through so that the process to start a retail residential kitchen is as easy as filling out a permit application, taking a food safety course, and getting inspection of your kitchen. In regards to the ordinance, we have made some changes since the last working session. Chief Staff Chris English recommended that we put a few additions to the compliance section around the signage and the requirements to include the permit number on advertisements. And we have added both of these and hope that with these edits made, we're in a position to pass this through. Thank you. I guess when it's my turn, I just have a few things that I'd like to raise. Thank you so much to my colleagues for joining us.
Thank you. We've also now been joined by Councilor Ed Flynn. So in terms of counselors, everyone, I don't know if everyone has the updated red line kind of version or the most recent version of the text amendment and the ordinance of my counselors. I think that went around before the working session.
Is there a recent version of the text amendment, Counselor? It's Christine. I don't have one. I just have
the original. Just both. But I just want to make sure both went out. That's all. The text amendment as well as the ordinance.
Yes. But just, I sent out a red line. I sent out a clean copy of the amended ordinance.
Excellent. Okay. Perfect. Just want to make sure this so we can follow along. And counselors, I don't know if you want to start with any other question, if you would like to start with questions, or it might make more sense for the administration to go through whatever suggestions that they have. Councilor Mejia, do you have a preference? Why don't we go ahead actually then and have the administration go through the text amendment and both of the language as to what concerns they have.
Councilor Edwards, I was on, I'm on my phone and having issues with my internet, and but I take your lead, and I think whatever you think makes the most sense is I'm fine with.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to turn it over very quickly to the commissioner and the fire marshal. I wanted to make sure that the language and as it's written or any concerns that you specifically had were addressed.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I haven't seen the actual the written version, but the changes that Councilor Mejia mentioned, what we're looking for. So, as far as the ordinance itself, I have no concerns there. That's my only remaining concern would be around the zoning piece of it. And I totally understand and agree with trying to make this as easy as possible and reduce obstacles. But I do, think that we should, have some conversation at least about whether or not it should be and not require any zoning approval if someone is establishing a business in a home where there's pedestrian traffic directed to that person's door. That's the only thing that concerns me. The other parts of it, whether it be sales by delivery or otherwise, I'm perfectly comfortable that those could be allowed uses if approved by the zoning commission. But should there be some language in that zoning amendment to at least allow some community process when a business will lead to direct foot traffic to someone's door? Example, like customers, going to that person's door to purchase something.
Understood. Any other comments from either the commissioners or?
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
So from the fire department point, I don't think there's anything we can add to this ordinance. Certainly, there's no exemption for following any of the fire regulations dealing with smoke detectors and even fire extinguishers being added. So that's all stuff that can be done as we go along. It may pick up our running a little bit with the, our concern would be that disabling the smoke detectors at some point. So that's a concern of mine. But that's something that nobody should be doing anyway. So I don't see how you can really address that in this ordinance. So it is a concern of ours, but like I said, I other than those small concerns, and they're not small concerns, I shouldn't say that. But I think this looks good.
Okay, so just to give folks some context, we're going to go now into the language, but in terms of safety concerns and in terms of the permitting in this process, this is already again allowed by state law. And what the city of Boston is doing is trying to make sure that we come up with a procedure for permitting, which state law basically says that's the role of the city or the municipality. And so if folks can open up, we're going to go through the residential kitchen ordinance first and the edits that we put in and suggested by the administration. And then we're going to go to the text amendment itself. So again, we're looking at section 1. This would be an ordinance that basically amends and allows for retail residential kitchens. We define this cottage food operation, and then we define cottage foods. And it does make very clear retail residential kitchens may not prepare finished products that require hot or cold folding for safety, including meat or fish that is raw or heat treated, a certain cut produce, including melons, leafy greens, and tomatoes. Then, and this is where the amendments really start in the red lines, in C, it says retail residential kitchens is any cottage food operation that sells directly to the consumer with respect to zoning code 2A, which states that merchandise cannot be sold from the home. So we make that very clear that it cannot be sold directly from the home. Permits. A retail residential kitchen permit shall be required for any resident who wishes to prepare the cottage foods. So this is allowing then for the permitting process. The annual fee for the residential kitchen permit will be $100. The applicant shall obtain all necessary permits and regulatory approvals. What has been removed is including approval from the Boston Zoning Board of Appeal. That has been struck from that language. But it does say that may be required to safely operate a residential kitchen. It also, in this current red line version, says applicants who are renters must provide written permission from their landlord in order to obtain a permit. I'm assuming, and so I'm going to go through the section on permits. To Councilor Mejia, that language on the renters providing written permission from their landlord, is that because we assume the landlords will be the ones who are seeking the permits and we don't? Councilor Mejia? I just want to make sure that was the goal.
Oh, yes. In regards to removing the landlord requirement, we only put that in there because the landlord would have to know if there was going to be any changes in the usage of the apartment. Because we have filed this text amendment, I'm hoping that there's no longer a need for that. That we wouldn't need to get landlord approval for a piano tutorer. You don't need to do it if you're a math teacher. And if our zoning amendment passes, you won't need it for the residential kitchens either.
Okay.
The liability is all the same. A patron of a piano teacher could trip and fall in their apartment, like, so I'm just, you know.
Okay, and then the other amendment was to remove approval from the Boston ZBA as well. That's in C, right above it. Just making sure that that was for, that is consistent with the zoning, the text amendment that you filed. That's why that language is removed.
We are removing that because the zoning amendment would make that null and void.
Right. So you're doing it to be consistent with the amendment. Okay. Just making sure we walk through all of the suggestions. I see your hands raised, counselors. I want to make sure we go through all of the red lines first, then we'll go back through and questions and suggestions. Okay. So that's the permitting section. That's where the red line happened. I don't believe there was any questions from the first edits were under definitions. We just did permits where we discussed 2 edits to the ordinance. Now we're in training. The ISD will ensure that residential kitchen permittees and anyone working in the kitchen is certified through a nationally accredited food safety certification exam organization recognized in Massachusetts. That's put in. That is a change. And that was just to make sure that we had, instead of specifically calling out surf save, we wanted it, I believe that was actually a suggestion, or that was consistent with Dan Prendergast's suggestion, wasn't it consistent with the health department's goals?
Yes, Council, that is correct.
Okay. So mark that up if you have any questions about that, counselors. Part D stays the same for health code standards for permitted residential kitchens. Their general guidelines, they follow the state sanitary code of 105 CMR 590. Then E is compliance and enforcement. I know we had a lot of conversation and questions about this. Inspection stays the same. Residential kitchens shall receive annual inspections to the health division services and shall fully comply with their rules and regulations. Then B, there will be a requirement to include the permit number on advertisements. I believe that came from ISD. The permit number issued by the department shall be included in all advertisements promoting the cottage food operation. The other suggestion came from ISD, I believe, was signage. No exterior signage shall be allowed unless such signage is permitted under the zoning code, chapter 16-33 of the city code. I believe that was also suggested by ISD. Penalties: a person found to be operating a retail kitchen in violation of this section shall be should be fined up to $300 a day. That is staying the same. And then enforcement, the provisions of this section may be enforced in accordance with the non-criminal disposition process of MGL, the chapter 40, section 21D, and chapter 40U, as accepted by the city of Boston. Both of those, that language stays the same. I believe that was the edits for that section. And then to finish, the commissioner of the inspectional services shall promulgate rules and regulations necessary to implement and enforce the provisions of this section. And then it would be effective upon passage. That's also part of the language here. So on the ordinance, suggested language and edits, I'm going to go and I'm going to check in order of arrival, or we can go from, we'll start with the lead sponsor, and then we'll go from in order of arrival. So Councilor McKee, I don't know if you had any other suggestions or thoughts about the language and the edits that are proposed right now, or if you had any other ones. If not, then I'll just go through my colleagues.
Sorry, we have moved forward. I'm such a mess today. I think that we have moved forward with the proposed edits from the last working session, so we feel it's good to go. It's in a good place. So I think I'd love to hear from my colleagues. That would be great.
Perfect. I believe in order of arrival, we have Councilor Braden.
I had a question about the the applicants who are renters must provide written permission from their landlord in order to obtain a permit. I don't really see a retail kitchen as equivalent to some other home-based businesses. I think it may be a good idea to have a permission from a landlord. So it's just a question. I think, were you proposing to remove that, Councillor Mejia? Were we proposing to remove the need for applicant permission from landlords? Was that what was being proposed? Because
Sorry, we are proposing to remove that. It doesn't line up with other usages in the section 2A.
so in terms of liability insurance, is the liability insurance going to be the responsibility of the business owner or the landlord?
That would be, the liability would be understood as the same as any other accessory home occupation.
So we discussed in the previous working session and in the hearing that the actual residential kitchen would normally get supplementary plus several that they can provide. I don't know if everyone else is getting a lot of the feedback, but it's a bit difficult to hear the conversation. But go on, Councillor Braden. Councillor Braden, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was trying to cut out the noise. Yes, yeah, if it's been discussed and it's in line with other accessory use provisions, then that's fine. The down on section E, compliance and enforcement penalties, a fine of up to $300. It might be useful to add per day after $300.
Commissioner or
Just
Chief,
before.
yeah, Commissioner or Chief English. I just want to make sure that's accurate. That it could be $300 per day for the violation, not just a total.
Yeah, we have no issue with that, with language that says that each day is a separate offense.
Yes. Councillor Mejia, are you okay with that? Councillor Mejia, the suggested amendment from Councillor Braden about each day being a separate offense.
So it's my background noise that is causing everyone's, I don't know if you can hear me, but yes, we're okay with that. I'm gonna try to remain mute so that I don't, there's a lot of back stuff happening, but we're okay with that. Councillor
Okay.
Edwards.
Thank you. Councillor Braden, keep going.
That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Just to be clear on the language, Councillor or Commissioner, it's that each day would be an additional offense, or could we just put in per day?
We can put in per day.
Okay. Councillor Bach, I believe, would be next.
Thanks so much, Councillor Edwards. I think, so one thing I wanted to suggest is just that, and I haven't yet figured out exactly how to do it, but I just think we might want to tweak the language in the ordinance and in the zoning amendment just slightly, because I think that, as Councillor Mejia said, it is 100% intending to make that distinction about not, this can't be a store that people can walk up to, right? It's not like a takeout thing that people can come get stuff from. But I'm just concerned that we find a way to phrase that a little more precisely, because, for instance, when we say here that, which states that merchandise cannot be sold from the home, I wouldn't want someone to be interpreting this ordinance 10 years from now, none of us are in the room, and saying, oh, well, you're selling it from your home over the internet. Like, right. Like, I just think we probably want something slightly clearer that makes that distinction between you are operating a business from your home, but there's no point of sale that people are walking up to. So that's not.
Counselor Bach, you're referring to section, just to be clear, it's AC.
I'm referring to AC. And then also in the, if you go to the zoning amendment itself, it also says, no trading in merchandise. But I think, again, like that language of no trading in merchandise was like written prior to the internet, I think. And so I just want to make sure, and I think it's probably just a couple of words like that just makes it a little bit clearer, the distinction that everybody, both Councilor Mejia and ISD, are intending to make here, where, like, as we've acknowledged, if you're basically opening a store in a residential district, then zoning questions come into play. But the whole point of the 2A amendment is not to send these folks to zoning, to ZBA, when they're putting stuff together and then selling it through delivery or other mechanisms. So yeah, I can play with that, but I think
open the language that says just would direct to consumer make more sense. So instead of from the home, but cannot be sold direct to consumer.
Well, direct to consumer is also it's used as a phrase that could mean like me not going through a middleman. I'm not quite sure. I thought I had one or two more counselors at the time, Counselor Edwards, so I haven't figured out exactly what the language tweak is here. But it's nothing substantive, because I think actually everyone's agreed on the substantive point. Sorry, I'm getting the feedback from Counselor Mejia. Counselor, go ahead if you wanted to.
Sorry, I have really bad feedback coming in, but I just wanted to make a recommendation. Perhaps we can say no in-person trading in merchandise. Would that be helpful in terms of language? Would that be more clear?
Yeah, I see Brian saying yes. Brian Glasscock from the BPDA. So that would be in the zoning amendment in person, or do you want that in home, like the in-person trading also for the ordinance as well?
I'm always a belt and suspenders kind of person, so I think probably both is fine. But I think I agree with Councilor Bach. I could see somebody saying that direct to seller is the same as if I did it over the internet, that's direct to seller. But as Councilor Mejia points out, in-person sales, I think, is something that anybody could understand. And that's my. The only concern I have with any of all this is that, as we're all reasonable people, and we all know what we think we want to have happen out of this, there's going to be somebody that is going to take this the wrong way and do something silly it's going to cause problems. And to the best of our ability, if we can sort of backstop against that. So I think the in-person sales is one way of doing that. If that's the thing we're worried about, lots of foot traffic, people showing up and buying from, off of somebody's front doorstep, that I think should solve that problem.
And I think it would be, if I can, Councilor Edwards, I think it would be as simple as if we did the in-person in the zoning amendment, and then in the place in the ordinance, it's actually referring to that place in the zoning amendment. So we could say, respect zoning code article 2A, which states the merchandise cannot be sold, in person from the home, or from the home, like in person or something, just to make sure that people who aren't us don't misunderstand that distinction. And then my other comment would just be that, I'm inclined to kind of agree with the cut of the permission from landlord, because again, the situation in which you're actually functionally opening a store is a separate one that we're still going to send to the ZBA, where you're going to need property owners to bring the action and all of that. In this instance, if I can run my sort of sewing or tutoring or whatever business out of my home, can I also, bake bread without getting my landlord's permission? I definitely think that my instinct would be yes, and that would help make this low barrier. I guess, that's my instinct on that, to agree with Councilor Mejia's office. I guess the only question I'd have is for ISD. I mean, ISD does lots of types of inspection without landlord permission now, because half the time you're being called to come look at things that landlords might not want you to see. What's sort of ISD's relationship to the property owners, just like in general, in terms of like notification or anything? Like I'm just thinking about like if we don't need landlord permission, the renter engages in this, therefore they need a permit, ISD comes to do an inspection. Is there like in the normal process, kind of a hook place where you need to notify the property owner, or how does that work on the ISD side in parallel processes?
You're correct, Counselor. ISD gets called to do inspections by a lot of occupants, tenants, and we don't need the owner's permission to conduct the inspection, but notification to the owner is a critical part of our process, because whenever we find things that don't meet our requirements, we're required to notify the owner and work with the owner to bring the unit into compliance. So that's the way that we interface with owners. With this, I think it's something that if we're not requiring owner approval, we should definitely have some education and encourage folks to work with landlords to make sure they're not violating any terms in their leases, and understand that all the other occupants have a right to quiet enjoyment.
Right. Councilor Bach, do you have?
Yeah, just do you currently, Commissioner, if you guys go and inspect a premise and there's an issue, you send a follow-up to the property owner? If you inspect a premise and there isn't an issue, do you send a notification of like, we came, or do you only do it in the instance where there's something to follow up on?
Yeah, we only do it when there's something that needs to be followed up on.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So I think, thinking about this piece, I think that's a wrinkle, I think, but there's I still think there could be an option where the other thing is to even think about just design wise, right? It's always lower barrier to sort of like give people an opt out versus an opt in. So another thing that like we could do is the tenant doesn't need to actively get their landlord's permission. But there's some point maybe when ISD gives the permit or something where a landlord gets a sort of notification, something that kind of makes them aware, I think, and that way they're aware and it's happening in their property, but you don't have to actively go get their permission. Because I know a lot of times landlords are just super, even irrespective of how they'd feel about the activity, they're just also unresponsive. I mean, I've had folks in my office who can't get their landlords to like certify that they live in the city of Boston for months. So I just want to make sure that if we do feel we should let the landlord in on the process, that we do it in a way that kind of puts the onus on them to respond instead of making the tenant wait for them.
So, Counselor, to that end, I've been thinking about that a little bit myself, and one of the things that crossed my mind is there may be some provisions, sort of boilerplate provisions in standard leases that have that touch on the point of in-home businesses. But even if there aren't, and I just don't have one handy that I can refer to see if that's really the case. But I suspect that if this ends up being a problem, the rental housing industry will respond very quickly by including that as another proviso within the standard lease forms if this ends up being a problem. So it may cure itself if there is an issue. But I think at a minimum, your point about at least notifying the landlord that it's happening, so it's not a big surprise to them, might be the right balance.
Yeah, and I agree. They could just, there's already, frankly, I think there's a lot of leeway to our landlords. We don't really have a standard lease in the city of Boston, and they take plenty of private contractual action as it is in their own interests. And I think probably that, as you're right, Brian, that they would find a way to do the same here if it was an issue. Councilor Edwards, I think those were my main comments.
Great. I see that there's been several hands put up by the administration and advocates. Councilor Flynn, do you want to go ahead, and then we're going to go to them?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you to Councilor Mejia as well, and to the city staff that is here, city employees that are here, Commissioner Irish, Commissioner Dempsey and the fire marshal as well. So I had a couple concerns, and you know, I am troubled about. I think they, as Commissioner Irish mentioned, I think, you know, as a district city councilor, residents would ask us about a certain business if this appeared in the neighborhood and there wasn't any neighborhood process or approval. I think it needs to go to the ZBA. I think that's a critical part of it. As a district city councilor, the buck stops with us. We can't pass the buck. We're responsible for what happens in our district. So I think it's critical that we have a ZBA process, because the first people that residents are going to call that may not approve of this are the district city councilors. Then the second issue I had is before I weigh in on whether I support or against this, I would like to ask, and I have the greatest respect for Commissioner Irish and for the ISD team. They do tremendous work, outstanding work, but we're adding more workload. We're adding more duties to these inspectors who are already working hard. Are we going to have more inspectors hired for ISD to do these assignments? And if so, let's make sure it goes in the budget. And maybe waiting for a formal vote until we see that these inspectors are added into the budget, because we can't add more duties to overworked personnel as it is without adding more inspectors. I'm troubled by that. And, you know, we just can't keep piling work on city employees without increasing the budget. So I want to ask, I know I asked Chris English and Dion Irish, but are you able to advocate effectively during this budget process for more inspectors? I need an answer on that, because I need 10, 15 more inspectors added into the budget. And Mr. Prendergrass, who does an outstanding job as well, but we need those employees added to the city payroll. So will you work with us, Dion Irish and Chris English, to advocate for more inspectors? That's critical.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I really appreciate your support for the work that the employees of ISD do. And yes, the short answer is yes. We will, you know, if this ordinance is successful, we will take a look at our needs and to make sure that we're advocating, and with your help, to ensure that we have the resources that we need to fulfill the mission of the department. Okay, then. Thank you, Commissioner. Then my only point is asking the chair is, I would like to have a vote after the budget is signed, so we know how many inspectors are hired, because we need inspectors in there. We need inspections ongoing. We need to make sure we have the resources there. And again, the buck stops with the district city councilors. We don't pass the buck to our at-large colleagues. We're responsible for it. And we're also responsible for what happens at the ZBA in the community process. So those are my comments. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. And it's good to see the Fire Commissioner and the ISD Commissioner here as well.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. So if I understand it, you want the ZBA to be part of this process, that there's a real concern about enforcement of this, and that is directly connected to the budget this year, and that so you're asking that we do delay a vote for certifying this until after the budget, and we see that there's actually resources provided to ISD to enforce.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Councilor Edwards. I think we want to make sure that there's money in the budget to hire so many more inspectors, because if there's more of these small businesses opening up, we have to increase the number of city employees as well.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go to the administration who has their hands up, as well as the advocates, and then we're going to go through the, and then I have questions, and then we'll go back again, starting with the lead sponsor to the city councilors. So we have Brian Tully, and then Chris English, then Andre, and Tazari, then myself.
And Councilor Edwards, I'm not sure if you can hear me or see me.
I can hear and see you, and see your hand raised.
Okay.
Counselor, or I'm sorry, Commissioner, Chief Fire Marshal.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. One worry of mine, the eyes of public safety, even though these right now we're talking about being, you know, not in-person retail. My concern is how is the product going to be delivered from point A to point B, from the retail's kitchen to, like, you know, the local corner store that's going to, you know, retail the product. So if there is a delivery, that I anticipate there's going to be some type of delivery mechanism involved with this kitchen one way or another. So my concern is that, you know, the van coming to pick up the product to bring to, you know, Stop and Shop, or, you know, ABC corner store, there's got to be some type of enforcement that prohibits ever double parking in front of the area of the retail kitchen, because it might, an emergency incident may not involve the actual kitchen, but a neighbor 3 doors down, that it could delay critical care to, you know, the other constituents in our city. So that was just one issue I think that I would like to see addressed before the program moves forward. But, and I guess that's it. That's my biggest concern right now. And thank you for hearing me out.
Oh, thank you. Chief English.
Thanks, Counselor. It sort of builds off of what Chief Tully mentioned, but going back to the conversation about the terminology direct to consumer, that's important because it's distinct in the sanitary code that cottage food operations are for direct to consumer. If they are not direct to consumer, then they are not licensed by the local licensing authority. They are licensed by the state, and so it's a whole different program. So it's a prohibition against one selling to grocery stores for them to then sell to a consumer. Cottage food operations have to sell directly to a consumer, whether that's through a farmer's market or you know, sales, online delivery, that type of thing. But that terminology direct to consumers comes right out of the sanitary code.
So what is your suggested language? Was the language that Counselor Mejia, Bach, and Brian that they came up, Brian Glasscock came up was in terms of in-person, prohibiting in-person sales from the home? Was that, you're saying two things? Let me ask this again. We need to have the words direct to consumer in here. Is that what you're saying at some point? And I'm asking you, was the in-person prohibition sufficient?
Yes and yes.
Okie doke. So do you?
So I still have my question is, how does, even if it goes from the kitchen that it's cooked at to my house, you know, that's is that what you're saying, Commissioner English? There still could be a problem with, you know, how parking's at a premium in our communities around the city, where there's still, I would love to see some type of, you know, enforcement mechanism added that you can never double park to load your product, even if it's your own van that you purchased to deliver your own product. There has to be an agreement that you either have to wait for, you know, if you don't have a driveway, you have to wait for a spot to open, but double parking will not be allowed, because I can see eventually there will be something terrible that does happen. Thank you.
So, if I may just quickly interject on the parking, double parking, before you respond, Chief English. And I'm hoping your response comes with some language points in the in the amendment and ordinance. When it comes to double parking, I think the issue that we're going to have is we do not also want to especially regulate residential kitchens differently than say we especially regulate anybody getting a Peapod delivery, right? They get groceries delivered to their homes right now, or Amazon or UPS or anything else. So we don't want to especially burden them because they're doing something different, but also just from their home too. And I believe majority of them will be selling at local farmers markets, right? And just getting their product in their car and just going over there and selling at giving it to the farmers market to sell. We did discuss the concern, and I think a lot of this is going to be about enforcement. So people will let us know that there's a problem. If they see a line out the door for my house, all of a sudden, there will be a call to ISD, and there will be an understood you are violating this direct to consumer law. So a lot of this is going to have to be, we'll see what happens, and we'll see how people respond to that. But again, we allow for double. I'm not admitting, nor am I denying that maybe when I am loading my groceries into my house, I might be not perfectly parked in front of my house to do that temporary quick self-delivery. And I think we're also need to be realistic about also what a residential kitchen's going to actually produce. We're not talking tens of thousands of product coming through. We're talking about, again, what cottage goods are, maybe jams at most, maybe some pasta, candy, popcorn. I mean, we're talking a capacity that's probably what one person can handle. But again, if it gets beyond what a person can handle, and we're going to hear about it, as Councilor Flynn noted, we're going to hear about it very, very quickly. So I'm going to go to Chris. Then
well, I agree with what you said, Councilor Edwards. I don't want to single out the kitchens, but I wish in the permit process, maybe, there could be a blurb about try and keep access free and, just food for thought.
Oh, no pun intended. I gotcha. Absolutely. I think just to quickly jump, I think what a lot of what you're speaking to and what a lot of what the commissioner was speaking to earlier is, points that could be made in the training. They have to take a safety course. I think there's parts of that course that you could be bringing these things up, and you need to keep these public ways free for emergencies. You need to do certain things. And I think we can actually, as a group, come up with all of these concerns and make sure we hit that in the training and the safety course that they're supposed to take. So we can add to it doesn't have to just be the food prep course part of it. It could also be some orientation about, this is so you want to move in a residential space, but you also are cooking food to a certain extent. Let's emphasize what that means. So we can also train people as part of that permitting process. Chief English, and then Andre, I know you've had your hand up and been waiting very patiently, Andre. So Chief English.
I just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose that reference to sale to a consumer, so we didn't conflict with the state sanitary code. Not that I wanted to make any major changes or anything. I just thought the consistency is how we've defined it here, and then how it's also defined in the state sanitary code. So as to not cause any confusion. But that phrase direct to consumer is used there. It impacts, it's in the sanitary code, because if it's not direct to consumer, it's wholesale and it's licensed by the state, not the city.
Okay, so there's nothing that you wanted to take out, and are you okay with the language? Are you and Commissioner Irish okay with the in-person language?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, then, so that's okay. Any other points, Chief? Commissioner? Any other points before we move to Andre? And then I see Commissioner Dumpty has raised his hand as well.
Council, the only other point I have to make is that I will have to leave at 11. However, the rest of the team from ISD will be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Andre, and then Commissioner, and then I'm going to go through the counselors again. Okay, Andre.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everybody for the discussion in detail. Really appreciate hearing all this. I just have a couple comments and then questions In terms of the add-on, I really appreciate that this is added on as an accessory use with Docket 0415, and I think that takes care of a lot of the issues with zoning with respect to changing the use of one's unit as opposed to using accessory use in your home. One thing I wanted to just mention in terms of how these regulations are promulgated by ISD is whether or not that distinction will be on the application for the zoning relief or the just someone applying as an accessory use, if that's going to be made clear so that I don't fall into a trap of applying for something that I don't think I'm applying for. So for instance, I want to apply for an accessory use occupation and, don't want to go through the process of, going through the ZBA, going through my landlord, going through all these hoops. Just want to make sure that we can make that distinction with the permitting requirement. And then just to add on to the double parking issue, I do think that's a necessary point to bring up. I just want to build off of what Councilor Edwards said in terms of the nature of takeout and people dropping things off to and from. I think that happens pretty regularly, and I don't think that will be that big of an issue if we do go forward with that process. And again, if that does become an issue, that calls into question the accessory use of this itself. So if there's complaints, then it calls into questions, is this accessory or are you doing this as a full-time job? And that's something that I wanted to bring up.
Right. So we're going to go back through counselors. Oh, we've also been joined by Councilor Arroyo. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. We're going to go, I will add you to the list of counselors when questions as we go through, if that's just to make sure that we don't break the conversation. I apologize, Commissioner Dempsey. Yes, I promised you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, I think it's a great idea if people are bringing the product to a farmer's market. They fine if they pack up their own car, but to Chief Tully's point, so who's going to be enforcing the parking issue? Is that going to be ISD or, if there's a violation along those lines? And unlike Peapod, that Peapod's going to come by your house once a day, maybe, or once a week, not make 5 trips or 10 trips that day. And I'm only bringing it up because I think if you're besides the emergency response and that being a possible problem, are you going to get kickback from neighbors when they start having a problem with parking? So I think the parking issue and making sure that there's an enforcement on not doing in-person sales is important. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and I think when it comes to parking, it'll still be the BTD and the normal enforcement that we have for those who violate, and a lot of that will I think that's actually another set of eyes on whether the residential kitchen is, as Andre said, really an accessory kind of side source of income, or really is becoming a full-on commercial large entity, larger than it's supposed to be. So, and the fact that if they are silly enough to grow that big, that they impact the parking patterns in the neighborhood, then they have certainly outgrown their space. And I think that's actually going to help us. We'll hear about it, as Councilor Flynn noted, very quickly, and we'll be the first ones to call. So I wanted to go through some of my own questions that might help balance some of the concerns that we have. First, I wanted to know if we would be open to a registry in any way, shape, or form, so that as people get the permits, it's very clear that there's a registry. like we do with I'm so sorry, Airbnb units. Why is a registry good? Because if I do have that concern, I want to know, oh yeah, no, that's a registered. That means by registry to me, you can say that they've gone through the training, right? They've gone through the permitting process, that they have a person of contact, and they have some standards that they're willing to uphold to. And then I can calm down and be like, okay, so this isn't just, Lydia decided to go make a bunch of stuff on her own in her house. I actually know she went through training and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if we'd be open to a registry. The other thing I'm wondering is, while I'm a landlord, right? And so part of me, I don't want anything to happen in my building that I don't know about. Now, I understand completely that we also don't want people to be able to control all aspects of people's tenants' lives, right? To the point that they could be oppressive. So I do like some form of notice, and maybe that's where the registry would come in. The registry automatically just notifies the landlord, or could notify, I think with Airbnb, we have ISD or OHS, ONS, Office of Neighborhood Services, I believe gives a notice, just could give a notice to the neighborhoods. That might help avoid going to the ZBA, but letting people within a certain radius know a residential kitchen is opening. So I'm just wondering if we could just do some upstream kind of notification, training, and registry, so that there's a certain amount of regulatory impact, and people understand there's eyes on this right now. Don't worry, everything's fine. That's at low cost, and hopefully puts people in a position where they feel like they have some sort of agency over what's happening in the neighborhood, but they are not absolutely controlling or going to destroy a local business at the same time, or local persons trying to make it work. So I'm wondering if we would be open to that, and that, because I don't think we need any language changes for that, because it literally says in the ordinance that ISD would come up with the regulations and rules for it. So I think that would be within your purview of ISD to come up with a registry and a notice provisions for Office of Neighborhood Services, to kind of just not even blanket, just a quick little thing that you could send out to the neighborhood association and so on and so forth. And also to BFD. Maybe BFD may also want to have access to the registry as residential kitchens are being registered. Commissioner Dempsey, does that make sense?
Sure, sorry. Yep.
So that we're all getting notified, including the landlord. There's a public place, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. It should be open, should be clear. This is a good idea. It's legal, right? It's already legalized by the state, but if with a registry, there's certain things that we can make public. I want to balance Councillor Flynn's concern about the neighborhood being able to know what's going on. But I don't know that we need to go through ZBA for the neighborhood to need to know what's going on. And I would prefer that we just have this like upstream notification that just happens. And with the registry, that can all, I think it's a real, legitimizing force, and demonstrating a person in good faith wants to work with the city and also set up a residential kitchen.
So I'll just add that we already publish on the city's open data hub all active food licenses. These would be a type of food license. So that information will be published directly to the web when they're issued.
But could you make it more distinct so that it's just not a typical food license, that it's actually under residential kitchens?
That it would be categorized as that in the full food service. They're distinct. We have different types of food service licenses, so it would be filterable. We could create a separate list, but we do publish that already.
Okay, that's wonderful. So would you be open to working with Office of Neighborhood Services for kind of notifying?
Certainly.
I think that would help. And Councillor Mejia, were you okay with the registry, since they're already public, but at least notifying neighbors and the landlord and whatnot that this is opening, so that we get ahead of the ZBA, but also you're okay. I see you logged in twice, Councillor Mejia. What are your thoughts on those two things? Well, while Councilor McKee, I know it's technical, it's been a technical concern, but the other thing I wanted to make sure that maybe this is just the labor lawyer in me, with the training, I don't know what these national trainings are. They seem to be very food specific and food safety specific, which is fine, but I'm honestly concerned about child labor laws. I'm concerned about other things as well that happen within residential kitchens or businesses. And this is coming from my organizing, working with people who are often unseen, right? Domestic workers who are in the homes of people. And you wouldn't believe the things that people do to people when it's in their home, even if they're doing a business or they're employing somebody. So I'm just imploring that part of the training that the city require include labor laws. So I don't care if you are a residential kitchen, if you employ somebody or work with somebody to do and produce product, you need to pay them. I want to make sure that there's part of that training is also fire and safety. And part of that is also, I mean, we can look at parking or at least, traffic, whatever, but I just want to make sure that the training that we are requiring is a little bit more robust beyond food prep and safety. Could that be a requirement in this as well?
Councilor, cottage food businesses are prohibited from having employees that do not live in the home.
So that doesn't mean that labor laws still apply.
Yeah, it has to be their primary residence. They have to be living there.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, that doesn't mean you don't overexploit your 16-year-old. It doesn't mean that you won't.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So that's what I mean, though, in terms of training. Why could we make sure that that's part of the training?
Sure.
That's all. That's my only question, is just making sure that the training is not limited just to food prep. And I know in the language right now, it seems to be specific about, it's actually just a national food program. Could we add in other training requirements? That's all. This is not to stop the permit in any way, just that these are brought up. That's all.
Is there a training program that exists that you would recommend that we include requiring these permittees to go through? So we don't provide the training on food safety.
Right. It says the National Accredited Food Safety Certification.
Yep.
That's all it says. I would just maybe have some open language and also training and then put in labor laws, fire safety, so on and so forth. And I don't care if that's a one pager that's given to the person. I trust ISD to figure out what that could look like. But I don't want people employing family members. They're the worst ones. Let me tell you that. I've represented domestic workers, I've represented nannies, and I'm telling you, the exploitation is for real. So I just want to make sure that is trained. And a lot of that exploitation is because people don't know. They don't know that minimum wage applies. We don't care if it's in your residential kitchen or not. It does apply. So does overtime. All those things apply.
I was only asking about an existing program because we don't do the training for food safety. We just accept the certificate in order to issue the food service license. That training is conducted elsewhere.
Would you be doing an RFP to get the training?
No, we don't know. The training is done by outside organizations. We require you to be certified in order to get a food service permit.
All right. Maybe we could check in with Manisha. I know that she was really working on the technical assistance with Natalia. She's not here right now, but maybe we can work with her. But I'm not trying to burden this. I'm just trying to make sure that there's certain aspects of the training that will be required in the zoning. So we can write it at a 30,000 foot level. That doesn't hurt, but just make sure that these topics are covered in the training. That's all. Does it make sense?
Yeah, just, I think I'm a little confused about who you envision doing the training.
I don't have a vision for the who. I'm just saying what I think what should be in it. So, okay, so those are the three areas, Councilor Mahir. I'm going to turn it over to you. 3 areas and buckets that I just discussed: a registry, some sort of an advance notice, maybe through Office of Neighborhood Services, and then just adding some training topics as well.
Okay, so I'm going to address a number of things with the time that I have, and I'll get to yours as well. So let me just start off by with Councilor Box. I really do appreciate her her comments in regards to where am I? Sorry. Let me start off with Flynn first. So Flynn, I really do appreciate, and I love how hard you go for, you know, all of our residents. I just wanted to just really be clear that, you know, as an at-large city councilor, I believe I'm trying to do what's best for everybody as well. So I really want to lean in and figure out how we can support those efforts as collaboratively as possible. Again, I just want to just be really clear that you don't need neighborhood approval for any other kind of home business, not for a piano tutor, not for any other types of businesses, or a showing or a sewing shop. So I'm just curious about kind of like, why would we need to continue to push for that? Most residents don't even know that those things are even happening in those homes. And I'm just a little bit concerned about waiting for the budget to decide whether or not this should pass. We've passed the police, you know, the Office of Police Accountability and others without budget approval or the process. So I'm just curious about what precedent we would be setting if waiting to approve an ordinance because of a budget. And I do understand and appreciate the whole notion around making sure that ISD has all of the support services. But I think there were a few earlier sessions where you brought that up. And I think that Commissioner Irish, it kind of really gave you the lay of the land in terms of what the workload would look like. And so I just kind of want to get some clarity around why that still is bubbling up to the top. And I do appreciate all of Bach's points. As always, she brings really viable solutions to get us to where we need to go. So I really do appreciate Councilor Bach's ability to walk in with some really good language for us to be able to move things forward. So thank you for that, Councilor Bach. And to your point, Councilor Edwards, I really do appreciate the whole idea of having a registry and a notification. I think that that's a really good best practice and something that we should definitely be putting out there. And I think without any real clear understanding of what labor training exists, we're setting people up to fail because we're asking them to do something that may not even exist. And if it does exist, we'd love to be able to you know, include it, but I'm just curious about that. I mean, I have an 11-year-old daughter and I put her a little behind to work every single day, whether it be washing dishes, doing the laundry. Like, listen, this is a family affair and everybody has to lean into it. So I think that, you know, if I'm violating any labor laws by putting my daughter to work, I need to know what that looks like, because if I'm a single mom and I'm trying to make my ends meet, and she, this is an amazing opportunity for her to develop some skills. I think it's all in how we choose to talk about that. I think that there are ways for us to explore that. I mean, I also think that we need to think about who our audience is here. You know, like initially this whole residential kitchen has always been about supporting our constituents and particularly our immigrants, many who are just trying to supplement their income. And this is not, I don't see this as a commercial kitchen. This is a residential kitchen. This is something where people are going to be able to supplement their income. So the double parking and all that sort of stuff, I don't see that. And I think to your point, absolutely, if it gets to the point where people are double parking and all of those other issues that you're raising, of course, they're going to call the district counselors, they're going to call us as well. And I think that it's important for us to get ahead of those concerns. But I think I just want to remind everyone that a lot of the things that we're discussing here, this is already a state law, and there are a lot of other municipalities across the city, across the state that have implemented these residential kitchens. And considering the high number of minority businesses and entrepreneurs and immigrants in the city of Boston, I think that we can really get to a good place to move this forward.
So just really quick, or I don't know if Councilor Flynn wanted to respond. I wanted to. I don't think Councilor Flynn had any more questions. But just to be clear, I don't think setting people up, like training people in what the laws are to avoid exploitation, is setting anyone up to fail. If the laws are very clear about what you can and can't do, who you can and cannot employ, you should know them.
Right, but I guess my question is, Councilor Edwards, we were talking about specifically a training. Is there a training? Like where does that information live, and how can we get that to them? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Sure, I think that the training is really us to design. I mean, we could literally, like I said, it could be a one-pager, being very clear. Here's your permit. Here's all the laws that apply to you with this permit. If you cannot have employees, so don't hire someone down the street's kid to help you out in your kitchen, right? That's an employee. If you do have your daughter or son or so on and so forth, you have to make sure you comply with all of the laws that come with, school and whatever. But you could break that down very quickly. I'm happy to give examples of that because I did the training myself for years for employers, immigrants, for low-wage workers. So I'm happy to figure that out. And I'm also think we have a robust, labor workforce development office that also could do some quick walk in and half hour or play the tape or something like that.
Okay, that's different, because when I think of a training, it seems like like a curriculum and facilitators and all of that. But I love the idea of having a one sheet. I think that I'm trying to streamline this as much as possible. So perhaps if there is a one sheet that we can include when they go apply for their permit, and then they can sign and say that they have read and understood, then that's easy. That's an easy fix. When I think of training, I think of another activity that someone will need to do, whether it be through Zoom or in person, that they would have to go through, but I love that idea. I think one sheet.
I want to be clear, right? Violating it, right? If you're found to violate the labor laws in this state, we don't play, right? It's triple damages. It's extremely intense. I know, because I've sued a lot of people happily for violating those laws. And the saddest part is when you're suing someone who really genuinely didn't know.
No, I love that idea. I love that idea of creating a one sheet. And if that's something that could be done easily, and it seems like you have a lot of experience, so let's just add that to the list of things that they will get when they get their as part of their licensing process and the permitting. I love it.
Okay.
That's a one sheet, and that they should sign for it.
All right, we'll have it mentioned, and why don't we just mention that as some sort of training or materials received, but we don't, the signature and all that other stuff can be coordinated a little bit. We'll let ISD figure out if that's necessary or whatnot. And a one sheet on fire safety. I think there's a package maybe of orientation materials that we can have provided. Does that make sense? Okay. Councilor Braden.
I want to thank Chris English for clarifying the direct-to-consumer definition, which raises an issue with Section B, Part A. Retail residential permit shall be required for any resident who wishes to prepare cottage foods or other foods deemed to be admissible by Inspectional Services Department, such as juices, teas, for retail and or wholesale. So really, the whole definition of direct-to-consumer forbids wholesale distribution. So I think we need to strike that. Is that correct?
What was it? Could you give me the exact citation, Councilor Brayden, again?
In section B under permits, in A, retail kitchen permit shall be required for any resident who wishes to prepare cottage foods and other foods deemed to be admissible by inspectional services such as teas and juices for retail and or wholesale distribution, which is sort of contrary to the whole definition of direct to consumer, which is specifically retail distribution.
That makes sense. I think we're trying to be consistent. Chief says it's a thumbs up. All right, that's fine. And yes.
So we take out wholesale then?
Yes.
Very
and
good.
just under that retail. Any other?
That's the, oh, and you know, I'm a landlord. I still would like to know what's going on in my rental apartment. We have a situation where we do rental with utilities. If you're a rental with utilities, you don't want your tenant, you know, baking hundreds of cookies every week in your kitchen downstairs. I really feel it's necessary for a landlord to know what's going on in their apartment, especially if you're a owner occupier. I think there's a higher level of there's a higher level of a notification needed if you actually live in the building with your tenants. That's just my own experience of being a landowner living with tenants.
So
just a thought.
No. But on the table has been the notification, but what are your thoughts specifically about permission versus notice?
I think notice would be the lowest requirement. Yeah. Permission, you know, permission, I don't know, then it becomes a lease specific, you know, the landlord should be at liberty then without prejudice to modify the lease to say that this is something they don't want in their apartment. But that's just my thinking on it. And I'm very supportive of this. You know, I'm somebody who makes homemade jams in my house, and I can't sell them, but I do distribute them. You know, I
distribute any to us, Councilor Brayden. We've not received any of your home. I have not received any of your cottage goods, or so I just want to say
there's a pot of jam in my office at City Hall waiting for you.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, so yeah, I just, you know, I really support this initiative. I think it's wonderful, but you know, the devil's in the details, which is why we're going through this line by line. Yeah. So I think at least notification of the landlord would be the lowest requirement.
I think that would make sense. Any other questions, Councilor Brayden?
That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Bach.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to break the streak and not be a counselor who confesses to semi-illicit activity on this working session. So I think we're 3 for 3 here. I just wanted to offer a couple of comments on what's been said. Strongly agree. I think Councilor Edwards and Councilor Mejia both said that there is a way to satisfy what Councilor Flynn is asking for in terms of the neighborhood having eyes and a sense of what's going on without burdening our ZBA process. And I think it's just, and I think that's the route we've gone here. And I think for really good reasons. I do think that zoning is designed fundamentally around the kind of the shared public spaces that we share. And I think this is activity inside of the home. And that although we all might be nosy about what our neighbors are up to, the fact that we like want to have control over that and the fact that we actually have a public interest in having shared control on that are two different things. And I think that and I think we've already made the distinction where if this is going to become a functional shop, it is going to still go to ZBA. So we protected the neighborhood on that front. And I think that, you know, part of the point of the permitting system will be that there's a hook. So if people see, oh, my neighbor's got a residential kitchen permit, but I can see that she's selling it out of her house and there's a line out the door, like they're going to have a mechanism to complain about that to ISD. So it's like, they've already got that hook. And I just really want to stress, I mean, Councillor Flynn mentioned sort of the question of staffing and burdens. Like I think as we discussed in one of the first hearings on this, our ZBA process is already considerably overburdened. And so I don't think adding this through that regulatory apparatus when we're already trying to put too many cases through and we've had to create a subcommittee and all that, I think that would be taking us in the wrong direction. So I do think there's a way that we're giving ourselves enough hooks, Councillor Flynn, that as a district councillor, if we've got a bad actor who's got a residential kitchen permit in our district, we're going to be able to follow up. We're going to be able to go to a city department in ISD, but we're not kind of further slowing down our ZBA process unnecessarily. So that'd be my comments on that. And then just, yeah, like I already said that I think notification to landlords makes sense. I don't really think we need the permission slip thing. I think, as you've both alluded to, the lease is certainly a mechanism by which landlords can do what they feel they need to do on that front. There was another thing. Oh, on the information, I think absolutely we should be giving the folks who get these permits a kind of standard packet that they need to acknowledge. To Councillor Mejia's point, like, you know, I think labor standards, the fire safety stuff, I think frankly included in the fire safety stuff, the kind of clear traffic lane, hey, you can't turn outside your business into a sort of permanent zone, right, of double parking or trucks pulling up all the time. But at the same time, those are sort of like points of information that we're asking them to acknowledge. And then it gives ISD a hook again to follow up with them if they violate any of those things. And as you say, Councillor Edwards, if they're violating the labor things, it gives forces beyond ISD an opportunity to follow up, which they would have anyways, because it would be illegal. But that's my instinct. Is I hear what Chris is saying, which is, you know, ISD just checks whether you have a certificate on these food training things. And so they've got to know what they're checking for. But I think if what they're checking for is, oh, and also you got this packet, have you acknowledged that you got it and that you read it? That seems like something that could go in an ISD regulatory process. And I don't think we have to be too detailed in the ordinance about what falls into that category. I mean, we can just list a few of the types of things that might cover, but I'm confident that we'll have an ongoing conversation with the department about how this plays out in practice. So yeah, I think those were all of my points, and I'm sure as soon as I give up the floor, I'll remember another, but again, have to do it before I confess anything. So the floor is yours, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And again, I neither admitted nor denied any illicit activity. I simply stated that may have happened. Neither admitting nor denying. We've also been joined by Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Arroyo, you are next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would love some of the Braden jam. I didn't know that was a thing, but I've signed me up as well for that. And so I just want to touch, because I did not see all of it, all of this hearing. I have gone through the ordinance as it's written. I'd like to thank everybody for their diligence on that, and sort of fleshing that out into a real document. In terms of just the thing I heard about parking, you know, I would just note that on my street, right now it's 11:27. I've already seen 3 Amazons, a UPS, and a FedEx. And so if we're not requiring corporations like that to do anything special when they are just out and about, and times 10 or 11 times a day, I might see those vehicles on my street, my residential street. I don't think we have to worry about burdening a private home that might be selling a couple jams or teas in a way that we're not burdening our major corporations. And so from that standpoint, I just don't think that's something that I'm personally concerned on in terms of the double parking residential thing for this. In terms of the worker labor law thing, as far as I understand it, there was some back and forth there about, who would do the training, who wouldn't do the training. I do like sort of the solution that I think I heard, which was creating a one-pager that would be accessible in whoever that person's language is, that they sign off to just say, I read this. I think that's a good way to do it, and shouldn't really burden the process much at all. So I like that resolution, and I think that's an important point to make. Though I think that maybe, hopefully, I can't speak to it, but I would hope it's a minimal issue. I think if it's an issue that exists that we can address with an actual one-pager, then that's a big impact for a small thing to do. And so I would like to see that as well. And it sounds like that's a good way to do it. In terms of just the holdup in doing it post-budget or pre-budget, I don't see why we couldn't do this pre-budget, to be perfectly frank. And I missed some of that. So if there's like a good reason that I missed on that, I'm happy to hear it. I'm happy to also take a call offline if it's not worth having a conversation here on. But I think what we're talking about is giving people who are struggling in this moment a lifeline, something where they can make some money, some food money, some grocery money, some rent money, whatever this is for them personally, something that helps keep the lights on, whatever that is. I don't think we need to delay that when I think we've really reasoned out and sort of sounded out a really nice ordinance here. And so, that's where I am on it. I support this, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that everybody's putting into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Flaherty? He may have signed in and signed off. Sorry, I didn't announce him earlier, so he may have, but he was here. Councilor, it's about 11:30. We've done a good amount of work in this working session. I think I want to go back. I don't know if the administration has any suggestions.
Councilor Edwards, I think Councilor Flaherty is in the attendee list.
Oh, is he?
Yep.
You mean I didn't let him in? Okay. Well, that's my apologies, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Flaherty.
I haven't been let into worse places. Don't worry about it, Madam Chair. No, just I've been paying attention. Obviously, I was participating in the initial hearing and as well, and had to stand in when you had another commitment, and obviously I've been supportive of the lead sponsor. And again, my concerns were, I think, alleviated in the initial hearing and working session around just public safety concerns as it pertains to, fire code, life safety issues, and obviously, and then if someone's producing a food that's really good and there's long lines outside of a residence or cars double parked, et cetera, like that, just making sure that we're thinking down the road as to the potentials that could pop up from here to here. But it was well thought through, and obviously the hearings and the working sessions have been robust, and most of the questions that I had were answered. I know that the fire chief was on as well. So again, just listening in, and I appreciate the opportunity to opine briefly, and look forward to your committee report. And thank you, and thank the lead sponsor.
Thank you. I have a question in terms of the whole, because right now it's as written, it says, shall become effective immediately. And again, I think if I understood Councilor Flynn's concerns about pre or post budget, it's not so much the budget as it is prep for ISD, that the ISD has the prep. I also think that there might be a reason to have, so we may not have to wait pre and post budget so much as, I see you, Councilor Mejia, I'm gonna finish my thought, so much as maybe saying shall become effective in 30 days or become effective in a certain amount of time upon passage, which could then ISD can come back with, we intend to do the following to adjust. But also for me as a landlord, it might be worth it then at that point that we could do enough media push saying this is new, this is happening, this is what's gonna, tenants will be able to do these things. So if you wanna have that conversation with your tenant, if it's a concern for you, you might wanna get ahead of that. And you might wanna say, yes or no in the lease, or you might want to say, I don't care, just let me know. That might be something too. So there's kind of a prep and adjustment as well that we could just allow for. The other point of notification to landlords that we have is the Landlord Registry, right? So the Landlord Registry has about 14,000, I think, or so landlords registered or units registered. With the push of a button and an email, you get my fees. But I mean, you could also just send out a notification, new laws or new notification requirements that just boom, you just send out. So that's also something too. So you could send that out, notify the whole city of Boston. It's worth celebrating too, to say like this is something, an option. A lot of people who may not know about it, who may think like, wow, I desperately need to make some side income and I could do this. And this is the permitting process. And so just basically saying, build in a little bit of cushion, but it'd be like, we could still possibly pass this before the budget, but say it becomes effective in 30 days, which allows for ISD to build up, allows for notification to go out, allows for these packets to be finished, all these things that we're talking about, allows for the training program to be picked for the food safety, but also allows, the one pager to be done in more than one language so that we're not effective immediately. Okay, permits. Okay, wait, you guys got to wait until we get all this stuff done anyway. So would it make sense to just have a effective pass now or pass soon, Councilor Mejia, with 30 days, kind of allowing for all these little things to fall in line, but it's already passed?
Absolutely not. No, I'm just joking. Not teasing you. No, but I think that's reasonable. I also think Councilor Edwards, in one of our earlier working sessions in regards to the workload, I think we did talk about giving this an opportunity to see how many ISD inspectors, like how does that shift, and that we would reevaluate this for the next budget cycle. I think that's what we discussed when we were trying to figure out the how. So perhaps within the line of like rolling this out with all of those, the 30-day notice. But then also I think we should include kind of like an overview of how many applicants and what the workload looks like, right? So we could kind of do like a little check-in in I don't know, quarterly or in a year, or whatever you deem to be acceptable. But I do think to satisfy Councilor Flynn's concern, which I hear in every hearing about how much more we need of everything. I think that this could be a good way for us to just do a check-in and support that additional workload. Is that something that we can
bake in? Sure. Yeah. So if we had like a 30-day effective, so pass with a 30-day effective date, with an annual or biannual check-in reporting from ISD on the number of applicants, on the number of complaints, on any financial shortfalls.
Yeah, because I think then in that way we're being fiscally responsible, and that we're able to do an assessment and then adjust our budgets accordingly for the next go round if we see that there is an uptick. I don't expect hundreds of people lining up to fill out all of this, and but we never know. This might be super duper popular, and then the Commissioner, I almost called you Counselor, Commissioner Irish, you're like having to figure out how you're gonna upkeep the demand. So let's just do a check-in annually.
I think that's fair, and it would just be like a rolling working session or something.
And then we could adjust accordingly. That gives us some opportunity for wiggle room. I think that would be a good way.
Yeah.
And then to Councilor Flaherty's point, I think, we had some really good direction and feedback in terms of how we could address some of the safety concerns. And I really do appreciate Councilor Arroyo's analogy or example of all these other corporate folks that are double parking in our neighborhood. And I'm a homeowner, and I do have tenants, and I appreciate some of the comments, because yeah, those things could add up. So I do think notification is fair, and agree to that as well.
Excellent. Just going back. Go
Councilor,
ahead, Ron, and then before you go, it'll be Councilor Andre had it raised his hand, then Councilor Bach. Go ahead,
Thank you so much. sorry, go ahead, Brian.
And I'll be quick, as I just want to follow up on the discussion about the timing piece. The boring parts of this are just the nuts and bolts of getting this to the zoning commission. So the sooner that we have something, solidified, the sooner I can get it advertised and so on. And ordinarily, the default position is when it is advertised, it becomes the de facto law of the land. So it could apply, unless we say otherwise, it will apply as soon as we advertise it in the paper. So I want to just flag that for you. I think this is maybe something that wouldn't need to go through the full BPDA board recommendation. If it comes as a recommendation from the council as an ordinance, the zoning amendment itself could go directly to the zoning commission. But I just want to flag that as there's a sequencing thing that we need to be mindful of. So lining that up to hit the next zoning commission and giving us enough time to advertise it will be important. That's all. April, I'm trying to look at my calendar, April 15th. Yeah, April 15th, and then May, the next one's the second Thursday in May, which is, I can't reach my calendar. I'm using a paper calendar, folks. This is awesome. I believe our zoning commission is May 12th. So if that's the target, May 12th, we need to work backwards from there. I need to be able to advertise it, a couple of weeks beforehand, et cetera. I just want to flag that it's not the fun part of this. This is the nuts and bolts parts, how we actually get it done. But
right,
we have to pay attention to it.
Right. So the ordinance still wouldn't be the ordinance itself could still have the 30-day bake-in. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, right. I think that'll work. It's just we need to make sure that if we want them to, it won't become operational until we advertise the zoning commission, the zoning amendment.
Right.
ISD would still begin flagging things, for instance.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless we advertise it or we pick a different date for it to become effective in zoning. I know that's not fun stuff, but I have to think about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andre, and then Councillor Bach.
Thank you so much. Just to be very clear, I know we've talked about this over and over, but for section 1B, part D, that's talking about the applicant who is a renter who needs permission from their landlord, is it my understanding that that's being taken away and then a new section is being added to where landlords will be notified, or the neighborhood's going to be notified on these permits?
You're correct in that the language is going to be taken away. I think it's great that you are prompting us to figure out how are we doing this new notice component if we all agree to it. So that's let's just talk about that. Okay. Do we want notification from ISD, or the city shall notify landlords? Councillor Bach?
Yeah, so I think that we could add something in, under compliance and enforcement, or something like a thing that just says because it's basically something that's going to be part of the ISD regulatory process. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we shouldn't in the ordinance be too specific about what mechanism ISD is going to use. I trust Chris and Commissioner Irish to figure that out. So I think just something that indicates in the law that landlords will be notified. And I think it might belong. It might belong in E, since that's a lot about what ISD is kind of doing in relationship to this, as a section, as another letter section inside of E. That'd be my comment. And then my only other comment, I was just going to say about the follow-ups check-ins with ISD. Mm-hmm. I think we can put those in, but I would suggest that we do something that we're going to check in about it, whether it's every 6 months or annually or whatever, for the first couple of years. I don't really think it makes sense to bake in an infinite check-in with ISD on residential kitchens. Just, we have a bunch of those kind of dead letters that hang out in ordinances and we don't do them. And it feels like this is something where what really matters is the implementation. And I agree with Councillor Mejia that when we asked that question at the last working session, I mean, the number of these right now is very small. If it stays at all at that scale, it's not going to necessitate tons of additional inspectors. It's like you said, Councillor Edwards, it's going to be mainly the setup. Obviously, if it were to mushroom, which would be great for all these proprietors, like we would want to know that. But I just don't know that it's something where, if I think about all of ISD's regulatory processes, I don't know if this one specifically we want to require a council hearing indefinitely. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
That makes sense. So, so your 2 cents plus some language would be really good. So how about?
I can deliver on that, sure.
So, and Councillor Mejia, you're fine with that? The check-in being limited to the first couple years, so it's not forever?
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. All right. Fire Marshal Tully, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just since we were talking about like the landlords, it'd be nice maybe for landlord protections on the 1 page, you know, like requirement list. Landlords are responsible for the upkeep of, like, you know, the smoke detectors and fire protection features in you know, in your home. So if the companies come in for, you know, repeated food in the stores, like Commissioner Dempsey touched on right at the beginning, you know, sometimes people disconnect their smoke detector in their kitchen because it keeps going off. You know, that can't be tolerated. So that eventually that's going to fall on the landlord. You know, they're ultimately responsible. So I'm just trying to protect the landlords too here. Thank you.
Agreed. I think the 1 pager, I think we discussed that it's going to be an informative packet that they're going to sign and acknowledge that they got the information. And so we'll check in with, we'll probably get maybe a 1 pager or some sort of language from you, from the BFD. By you, I mean the BFD, about the parking, as Councillor Bach noted, and about other things. And then I will happily help inform any workers' rights things. And then we just get the whole packet together. And I think Councilor Mejia's, you know, great suggestion that they sign it as an acknowledgement. I got this information, so they can't say I didn't know later on. That's the goal. And then they're going to have that. Plus, they have to do the actual food prep certification. Councilor Mejia, you have your hand raised. Is that from before, or is that from right now?
Yes, I do have a quick question, Councillor Edwards. Just so that I'm clear in terms of the process, it would just be helpful to know, are all of these things going to need to be created before we get to vote, like the training, the 1-sheeter? Is that all like, do
No,
we have to next?
No, my suggestion was that we could, if we agree to the final language of the ordinance, we could pass it and say it becomes effective in 30 days, which allows for us to do all this stuff, because the ordinance is going to call for it. And that way we don't put, you know, a 1-sheeter being the reason why we don't get this stuff done.
Okay.
But at the same time, putting the 30 days on there means we're going to get it done, right? We're not going to hold up on those things.
Okay, so I would also, I'm just curious in terms of planning on, you know, recommendations on this docket. Like, what are the next steps? How are we moving forward with that?
So I'll probably check in with you offline about your timeline. I know Brian just noticed about the zoning commission that there's 2 deadlines to look at for the zoning amendment to actually pass and get before them. So there's the April deadline, then there's the May one, and then we coordinate that and check in with the whether and when it should be presented before our body to get it moving, to get both moving. So we want to get the zoning amendment out of our body, and we want to get the ordinance out of our body as well, the city council. So I can coordinate with you about what that timeline looks like.
Okay.
The next step is presumably, assuming you are okay with all the suggestions and we are walking away with a consensus on the suggested language, we set up a time for a vote.
Okay.
Okay.
That we can do over the next for next Wednesday. Are we looking at in the next 2 weeks? I'm just curious.
I'm looking to talk to you about that
Okay, well, you and I will
Okay.
figure it out. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
But that's the next step. Get both of them out of our body.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Any other suggestions in terms of this language, or any other suggestions for, yeah. I see you. No, Andre, you pulled back. You were
Sorry,
ready, and then
just
you
I
were-
was getting ready for the buy. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, you were saying goodbye.
Yeah, I have to actually leave. But thank you all. Thank you all so much.
No, thank you.
Counselor, I thought about the timing issue a little bit more. And from what it sounds like to me, as the council moves this forward, we could already lock in that May zoning commission date, but the zoning would become effective as soon as we advertise that hearing. So whenever the council, assuming the ordinance passes, we can immediately advertise the zoning amendment, and that would make it operational and functional. In other words, whatever day you pick, we can put that in the zoning amendment that's going to the commission, but it will become operational whenever you say. So I think in terms of zoning commission, the May date's probably the best date to look for. Otherwise, you're going to be really rushed to get this advertised. It would need to be advertised like, first thing next week for an April zoning commission. But
And
it
we
won't.
wouldn't have passed it by then.
Yeah, and it won't. Yeah, and I think it would be a mistake to advertise something that hasn't actually been passed. But we can work that out. But I think aiming for the May date. My point is, whatever date you pick for it to become operational, we can work with you to make that happen. But I think as a practical matter, it won't go to the zoning commission until that May date, just because it's April's. I'm looking at the calendar, and it's coming up pretty quick.
Okay.
But we can make it operational whatever date the council so chooses.
Yeah. So just appreciate that. Just for everyone, folks to know, Councilor Mejia and I will work on that, knowing that information and knowing that the May date might be the most practical for the zoning commission, not for us, Councilor Mejia, not for us.
And just add that will be effective date for the ordinance language is important for us, just on the administrative and the technical side, to be able to get that all set up as well. We do have work underway now, but that little window of time would be helpful for us too. Right.
That's it. Councilor Bach?
Yeah, and Brian, what's the notice deadline for zoning commission?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay. Just because a thing that I think I'm also taking from Brian's comment, Councilor Edwards, is ideally actually, because it becomes effective when he notices it, ideally we would actually have the point of noticing of the zoning amendment line up pretty close to the 30-day mark from the passage. Because otherwise we'll end up in a situation where we've just made it legal by zoning and we haven't yet gotten to, like, ISD hasn't run out their clock. So just just flagging that for your consideration.
Just a point of clarification, and unless we say otherwise, the effective date is the date that we advertise it. If there's a different date, we just have to call that out in the advertisement and in the draft amendment itself.
Right.
Otherwise, it's the default position. So we can tweak it whichever way, but we have to. If we leave it to chance, then it's whenever we advertise it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So we will be sure to be specific and consistent in the dates that we put in for the effective date in both. Okay. Excellent. All right. Unless there's anything else, I'll get on the phone, Councilor Mejia. Why don't we just ping each other in our calendars to make sure right after this, just to make sure we're on the same page. But just for the public's knowledge, this looks like it's moving quite well. And it's just a matter of making sure that we have the final language that we've just discussed, all points. and we'll be moving it along to a vote. We're just going to work out Councilor Mejia on the dates. You absolutely can say something. I read your lips, by the way, Councilor Mejia. That's how good I am at this point. I read your lips.
I wasn't sure, like every working session or like hearing order is different, so I didn't want to talk out of term. If there were any closing remarks, I'd like to say something.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I know, so I just wanted to just thank everybody. There's been a lot of thought, and I really do appreciate the administration in particular for really leaning in and having a series of meetings with us even before we got to this point. Commissioner Irish, I know you had to leave, but your team has just been incredibly supportive, and Chris English too. I forget your title, but I really do appreciate you leaning in as much as you have. Thank you so very much. And just everyone and my colleagues, I know you asked some really good questions, and I think that, you know, you're really centering this on those that you know are going to be blowing up your phone, complaining about this, that, or the other. So I do appreciate you all really looking ahead and making sure that we write this up in a way that gives us all the cover that we need to ensure that we're doing this in a way that is super mindful of all of our constituents. But at the end of the day, this is really exciting. If this is something that we can do for the city of Boston, I think that we can follow suit with so many other municipalities that have created this to support small entrepreneurs. So just wanted to thank everybody for their time, energy, and effort, and really best thinking around how we can move forward. And I want some of that jam, Braden. Braden jam. Thank you.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah, you have 13 jars at minimal to make right now.
Yeah.
And that's not even including the administration.
I have to look at my schedule and see what I've got available.
Let's see. Well, I have the one already in your office, just so I already called dibs on that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for participating today. We will be in touch. It looks like we've come to a great consensus. I'm very happy about that. That's the goal of the working sessions. And we will be sure to make sure that everyone's notified and on the same page as we move forward. So Councilor Mejia, I will ping you shortly. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.